the brisket, hush puppies, collard greens, fried okra, biscuits as well. It just, that cuisine is so good and it's so North Carolinian. Alright, what is going on everyone? My name is Chris Vincelli and welcome to my YouTube channel, the YouTube channel that discusses personal development, finances, and everyday life experiences. And today, I'm going to be speaking to you guys about the differences between living in Florida versus the state of North Carolina. Now, a bit of background on myself. I used to live in North Carolina. I lived in North Carolina for years, over half a decade. But I now live in the state of Florida. I live in South Florida specifically. And many of you, including my friends in North Carolina and my friends here in Florida, have been asking me, Chris, what are some of the differences in living between North Carolina and Florida? What are similarities? What's it like living in each state? And both of these states have their fair share of similarities and their differences as well. So today I decided to go over those differences and talk to you guys about what it's like to live in each state. What are its similarities and what are its differences as well. But before I get into that, if this is the first time you've stumbled upon one of my videos or if you've seen my content before, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you can be notified every time I come out with other great and similar content. And if you end up liking this video, go ahead and smash that like button. It's gonna help me know what type of content I should keep putting out there. All right, so let's get into it. And I should point out that my experiences might be a little bit more specific to the cities I've lived in North Carolina and in Florida, but I have visited pretty much the entirety of both states. So I'm gonna be forming my opinions based upon my experiences, not just in the cities that I've lived in, but also in my experiences visiting other parts of the state as well. Now, one of the ways in which North Carolina and Florida are different is in its weather. Now, there are some similarities. Springtime and summertime in both states see a lot of crazy weather, a lot of thunderstorms, some hurricane threats as well. And the summer months in both North Carolina and Florida tend to be hot and humid. I want to say that probably the humidity levels in both states are just equally high. So if you're going to be living in either one of those states, get used to hot, muggy, and humid summers. And that starts from pretty much the month of May and goes on till September. But that's where the similarities between the two states ends in terms of weather. North Carolina has, the typical 4 seasons that most of the United States sees. Fall in North Carolina tends to be pretty mild and comfortable, temperatures in the 60s. You typically would only need to go outside with a light jacket. Fall is actually pretty nice in North Carolina. Winters also tend to be pretty mild. If you live in the bigger cities like Raleigh and Charlotte, you're not gonna see that much snow. In fact, you might only see, snowfall once or twice a year. And temperatures are also, not that cold. They're typically in the 50s or maybe the 40s. So a little chilly, but compared to other parts of the country, that's actually pretty mild. And then, springtime in North Carolina, you see temperatures start to warm up. That's also when you start to see the development of, these afternoon thunderstorms and I think some tornado threats as well. I think a lot of the threatening weather, specifically when it comes to tornadoes, happens in the spring in North Carolina. So, North Carolina, you do see those 4 seasons. That's not the case in Florida. You don't have 4 seasons in Florida, regardless of whether you live in South Florida or even in Central Florida or in northern parts of Florida. You have the dry season, which is essentially the, more the winter months, November till March or April. And then you have the wet season. And the wet season is when the rains start coming in, particularly in the afternoon and the evenings. That's gonna be, let's say, from May to October. So you have wet season and dry season in Florida, whereas in North Carolina, you do tend to see the 4 seasons, the true 4 seasons. Now I should point out that both states get really hot and humid and muggy during the summer months. So Florida and North Carolina tend to be pretty similar in the summer. If you were to travel between both states in the summer months, you might not notice a difference in climate or in weather. You're gonna feel, pretty sweaty in North Carolina and pretty sweaty and uncomfortable in Florida as well if you travel, let's say in the middle of July or August. But that's where the similarities end. Another area in which Florida and North Carolina differ from one another is in its geography. Both states have pretty long coastlines. North Carolina borders the Atlantic Ocean, and they have beaches all along that coastline. Some pretty beautiful beaches, I must say. Big, wide, open beaches that are really just great places to visit, particularly in the spring and summer. And Florida, of course, is known for its beaches as well. I think the entire coastline of Florida is lined with beaches. It's incredible. On the Gulf Coast, on the Atlantic Coast, it's unbelievable. The thing is, though, North Carolina has more than just beaches. Once you move further inland from the coast, once you move towards the western part of North Carolina, you go through the plains, the rolling hills, and then you hit the Appalachian Mountains, where the feeling is a lot less coastal and a lot more alpine. You feel like you're up in the mountains. People have cabins up in the woods, cottages, you can go skiing. It really does feel like you're in an alpine environment, whereas just a couple hours away, you have the coast and the beaches and everything that coastal life has to offer. So North Carolina has a much more varied geography. There's a lot more diversity in its geography, from the coast to the plains to the mountains. The big cities are mainly in the middle, kind of in the plains or in those rolling hill areas like Raleigh and Charlotte and Greensboro. So there's a lot more variety in its geography. Whereas in Florida, there are no mountains. There might be some rolling hills, maybe in northern Florida or in central Florida, but there's nothing that compares to the mountains you'll see in North Carolina. North Carolina actually has the tallest mountains, the highest mountains in the entirety of the east coast of the United States. Whereas Florida, you have just flat land, some rolling hills, and of course, a lot of coastline and a lot of beaches as well. So while the beaches in North Carolina are beautiful and they're quite similar in terms of beauty to some of the beaches in Florida, I think that's where the similarities end. Florida is known for its beaches, whereas North Carolina is known for, quite frankly, quite a bit more than just its beaches. Next, I want to talk about the lifestyle that you can encounter in both states. I want to say that it really depends on where you live, but I think in general, in North Carolina, the lifestyle is a lot more laid back. I don't think people took themselves too seriously in North Carolina. I don't think things moved at a very fast pace, and that was actually pretty cool. That was actually pretty nice. One of the things I did like about living in North Carolina was that you did take it easy a little bit more. Things are not moving so fast. And I think this is true for whether you lived in the cities or you lived in the country. I think that things just tended to move at a bit of a slower pace in North Carolina. Whereas in Florida, that can be true for certain parts of the state. But I don't think that applies for a city like Miami. I think, certain parts of the state tend to be a little more fast paced. South Florida is like that, particularly in Miami. I'm sure that certain parts of even Orlando or Tampa have that pace to it. So parts of Florida definitely have that laid back lifestyle. I think of places in northern Florida, in the Panhandle, definitely in the Florida Keys. Life moves at a much slower pace. But living in Miami, I can see that Miami operates a little bit more like a big city. The bigger cities of the Northeast of the United States, like, New York or Washington, or some of the big cities of the West Coast, like San Francisco or LA. With that being said, I'll say that in general, both North Carolina and Florida do have a more of a laid back lifestyle, especially when compared to other big states. And that brings me to the next point I want to bring up, which is culture. How the two states differ from one another when it comes to culture and when it comes to its people. Now, I want to say that both states are in the south of the United States. Both states are southern states. But I will say that North Carolina definitely has more of a southern feel to it. The dominating culture in North Carolina is a southern culture. And, that is present throughout the states, whether you live in the cities or in the country, on the coast, up in the mountains. The dominating culture is a southern U.S. culture. Whereas in Florida, it is also a southern state, and I do feel that Florida does tend to feel more like a southern state more than anything else, but that is not always true depending on where you go. Yes, southern culture is definitely the dominating culture in places like northern Florida, in Central Florida, even some parts along the coast of Florida as well. But once you hit the big cities, particularly, South Florida, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, Tampa, I think those cities don't have much of a Southern culture. I think they have more of an amalgamation of different peoples. So the culture of Florida is a little bit more varied. Yes, you do have a Southern US culture that is present here, but I wouldn't say it's the dominating culture. I would say it's one of the main cultures of Florida. Florida is also heavily influenced by Latin American culture, and it's also influenced by a lot of Americans moving in from other parts of the country, particularly from New York, from Massachusetts, from the upper Midwest, and more recently, Americans moving in from places like California. So there are a lot more people in Florida from different parts of the country and different parts of the world as well. North Carolina had that diversity as well, but I don't think it had it to that extent. I think that there were a lot of people in North Carolina that moved in from New York and from the Northeast of the United States, and a lot of immigrants from Asia and South and Central America. But I think the dominating culture in North Carolina was definitely still a Southern culture. And that leads me pretty nicely to my next point that I want to bring up, the fifth point, which is food. North Carolina definitely has its own cuisine. I think that Carolina barbecue is fantastic. It's excellent, and you can find it throughout the state. And I think that barbecue is definitely something that is distinct to North Carolina. Pulled pork is fantastic. North Carolinians love their pork, their pulled pork, their brisket, hush puppies, collard greens, fried okra, biscuits as well. It just, that cuisine is so good, and it's so North Carolinian. When I think of food in North Carolina, I think of barbecue. And, you got your two different types of sauces as well. You got your ketchup-based sauce from Western North Carolina. You got your vinegar-based sauce from the eastern part of North Carolina as well. So barbecue in North Carolina is huge, and I think that is the most popular cuisine in the state of North Carolina. In Florida, I don't think that there is a cuisine that dominates the state of Florida. In fact, I can't even think of a cuisine that is unique or distinct to Florida. I know that seafood is big here just because the whole state is pretty much surrounded by water. So yes, seafood is big, but you also have other cuisines that are also very popular. Cuisines from Latin America, like, Cuban food, or Venezuelan cuisine, or Brazilian or Argentinian food is also really popular. You got some great Argentinian restaurants here in Florida, pretty much all over the states. You got some great Italian food, a lot of European influence on the cuisine here in Florida, great Middle Eastern food too. So you have a mix of different cuisines in Florida. I don't think there's any one cuisine that dominates the state, but I do feel that there are certain cuisines that are really popular, Italian, Middle Eastern, and certain Latin American cuisines like Cuban, Argentinian, and Brazilian, and yes, Venezuelan too. Oddly enough, though, I will say that although North Carolina is known for its barbecue, the best barbecue I ever had was right here in Miami. Yeah, go figure. All right, a couple more points I want to bring up, and one of them is just the sights that you can see, the things that you can do while in North Carolina or in Florida. And I will say that this is where I think both states are pretty darn different from one another. I think about things that you can do in North Carolina. There just aren't many things to do. The state has some beautiful beaches, so going to the beach for a week or for a weekend is a great option. And yes, you have the mountains in the western part of North Carolina, so checking out the mountains, going skiing out there is also an option as well. But that's pretty much it. I can't really think of anything else that you can do in North Carolina. I know that there's the National Whitewater Rafting Center, I think outside of Charlotte. That's a pretty popular attraction. But besides that, I can't think of much else that you can do. Spending a weekend in the mountains could be nice. Spending a weekend at the beach could be nice, but is that it? I think so. Whereas in Florida, there's no shortage of things you can do regardless of where you live in the state. Here in the southern part of Florida, we have the Everglades that you can check out for a day. We also have the Florida Keys, which are basically like a string of islands that shoot into the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. It's like a tropical island paradise in the Florida Keys. So we have that. Then in other parts of the state, you have the Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center near Cocoa Beach. You got obviously Universal Studios and Walt Disney World and SeaWorld in Orlando. You got Busch Gardens up in Tampa. There are just so many things that you can do in the state of Florida. Not to mention the preeminent resort destination in the United States, Miami Beach, and hundreds of miles of more beach all around the state. Florida really is a playground for the young and old. Whether you're an adult or you're a kid, it truly is just a real life playground. It's a playground for everyone. You can do whatever you want over here. It's unbelievable. There's just so much stuff that you can do. And then there are even the sporting events. North Carolina has some professional sports. You got the Carolina Panthers and the Charlotte Hornets based in Charlotte. You got the Carolina Hurricanes hockey team based in Raleigh. And then of course, college sports is pretty big in North Carolina as well, particularly in the Triangle region. But besides that, there's not that much else that North Carolina has to offer in terms of sports. I guess NASCAR is also pretty big in North Carolina too. In Florida, you got, I think, all 4 main pro sports leagues having a presence here in South Florida. You got hockey, football, baseball, basketball. You got the NFL and Major League Baseball present in the Tampa Bay area. You got basketball, the Orlando Magic playing in Orlando. You even have the Jacksonville Jaguars playing in Jacksonville. So, all the sports, all 4 main pro sports leagues have a very large presence in Florida. And then you got other things like, golf tournaments, tennis tournaments. I think you got the Miami Open here in Miami. So there's just a lot more to offer in terms of sporting events that you can check out and be a part of in Florida. By the way, guys, what do you think of this video so far? How's the content? Are you liking what you're hearing? Do you have any thoughts on the matter as well? I would love to hear your opinions. Please drop them in the comments section below. It would help myself, and I'm sure a lot of other people would really love to hear from you. And by the way, if you haven't already done so, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell. It'll help let you know the next time I come out with other great and similar content. And don't forget to smash that like button if you're liking this video. Okay, and the last point I'm gonna bring up is the cost of living. Now, I did some research on this recently, and surprisingly, both states are actually very comparable when it comes to the cost of living index. Both states are actually relatively cheap or inexpensive to live in when compared to other states. Where they differ though is in the cities. If you were to live in a larger city in North Carolina, like in Raleigh or in Greensboro or in Charlotte, you're gonna find that the cost of living there, while maybe a little bit more expensive when compared to living in the country, is still pretty low. Living in cities in North Carolina is actually pretty cheap. That is not always the case in Florida. Florida as a whole is still a relatively inexpensive place to live in, but you're gonna find that it is quite expensive to live in cities like Miami or in Miami Beach. With that being said, it's nowhere near as expensive as cities like New York or San Francisco. So I live in Miami, and Miami is still a relatively cheap city to live in when compared to other big cities in the United States. But it is pretty expensive when compared to living in North Carolina. I know that certain things are pretty cheap, like doing the groceries, transportation costs. Those things are pretty cheap. But Miami is pretty expensive when it comes to housing. Housing can be pretty expensive here, and also when it comes to going out, dining out or just going to bars and clubs. It is pretty expensive if you want to do those things in Miami. So I would say that in general, both states are actually pretty comparable, but where they do differ is in the cities. Miami being the biggest city in Florida is quite a bit more expensive than living in the biggest city of North Carolina, which is Charlotte. So that's it, guys. I hope you liked this video. I hope you found it useful. And if you're thinking of moving from one state to the other, or if you're just looking to get some more information on both states, I hope that this was informative. I hope this was helpful. I would love to hear your thoughts about this video. Please drop them in the comments section below. And if you haven't done so already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. It'll help let you know every time I come out with other great and similar content. And if you haven't done so already, go ahead and smash that like button if you like this video. It'll help let me know what type of content I should keep putting out there. Thanks again, guys. Talk to you soon.